America begins not as a nation, but as a question about freedom. In 1776, the Declaration of Independence claimed that liberty was not granted by kings, but inherent to human nature. This belief drew heavily from Enlightenment philosophers like John Locke, who argued that governments exist to protect natural rights. The founders framed freedom as the core justification for breaking away from British rule. Yet even at the nation's birth, freedom was unevenly distributed. While liberty was declared universal, slavery remained legal in all 13 colonies. Thomas Jefferson, wrote that all men are created equal, enslaved more than 600 people during his lifetime. This contradiction reveals that freedom in America has always been aspirational rather than complete. The Constitution attempted to balance freedom with order through checks and balances. The Bill of Rights promised protections against government overreach, including speech, religion, and due process. These amendments reflected a deep fear of concentrated power. Early Americans believed tyranny could return if power went unchecked. However, freedom was often defined by who was allowed to participate in democracy. Women were excluded from voting until the passage of the 19th Amendment in 1920. Native Americans were denied citizenship until 1924, despite living on the land long before the Constitution existed. Freedom, in practice, was conditional. The Civil War exposed the moral cost of limiting freedom. Abraham Lincoln framed the war as a test of whether a nation conceived in liberty could endure. The Emancipation Proclamation redefined freedom as a national moral imperative. Yet even after slavery ended, Jim Crow laws restricted black Americans through segregation and voter suppression. Freedom existed on paper but was denied in daily life. Philosopher Isaiah Berlin distinguished between negative freedom and positive freedom. Negative freedom is freedom from interference, while positive freedom is the ability to fully participate in society. America often excelled at protecting negative freedom while neglecting positive freedom. For example, free speech was constitutionally protected, but economic inequality limited whose voices were heard. The Gilded Age showed how corporate power could restrict freedom without government force. Factory workers, technically free, were trapped in dangerous jobs with little choice. Freedom without opportunity became another form of control. The New Deal challenged this idea by arguing that economic security was necessary for true freedom. Franklin D. Roosevelt proposed freedom from want and freedom from fear as democratic ideals. This expanded the definition of liberty beyond individual rights. Critics argued this expansion gave the government too much power. Supporters argued that freedom required collective responsibility. This tension remains unresolved. Modern debates over health care, education, and housing echo this philosophical debate. Is freedom simply the absence of restraint or the presence of dignity? The American question begins here. Freedom is not a settled truth, but a constant negotiation. Power in America was designed to be restrained, not eliminated. The founders distrusted authority after experiencing British rule. James Madison warned that power, left unchecked, would always expand. The Constitution divided power among the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. This structure was meant to prevent tyranny through internal conflict. Ambition was set against ambition. Yet power does not disappear simply because it is divided. It shifts. Early American power rested primarily with landowning white men. Voting rights were tied to property ownership in many states. Political power mirrored economic power. As the nation industrialized, power moved from land to capital. Railroad tycoons like Cornelius Vanderbilt accumulated wealth larger than many state budgets. These private empires influenced laws, labor conditions, and markets. The government often protected corporate interests over individual workers. The Pullman strike of 1894 revealed this imbalance. When railroad workers protested wage cuts, federal troops were deployed against them. The state sided with industry in the name of order. Power justified itself as stability. Philosopher Michel Foucault argued that modern power is not only enforced through violence, but through systems. Schools, prisons, and bureaucracies shape behavior without obvious force. America expanded its systems of control in the 20th century. The rise of mass incarceration transformed a punishment into an industry. The war on drugs disproportionately targeted black and poor communities. Mandatory minimum sentences removed judicial discretion. Power became embedded in law rather than overt oppression. After 9/11s, the balance between freedom and security shifted dramatically. The Patriot Act expanded government surveillance in the name of national safety. Americans accepted reduced privacy for the promise of protection. This trade-off raised a philosophical question. How much freedom should be surrendered to feel secure? The National Security Agency's surveillance programs were largely hidden from public knowledge. Edward Snowden's revelations exposed the scale of data collection. Power operated invisibly, normalized through technology. Social media introduced a new center of power. Private tech companies began shaping public discourse. Algorithms determined what information people saw and what was buried. Unlike governments, these corporations were not democratically accountable. Power shifted again, this time into digital space. Political influence followed attention rather than ideology. Elections became battles of data and persuasion. The Cambridge Analytica scandal demonstrated how personal information could be weaponized. Power no longer required force. It required insight. Philosopher Hannah Arendt warned that power becomes dangerous when detached from accountability. When systems operate without transparency, responsibility dissolves. Citizens struggle to identify who is in control. This confusion weakens democracy. Power in America is no longer centralized. It is dispersed across institutions, corporations, and technologies. Yet its effects are deeply personal. Power shapes opportunity, security, and truth itself. The American question persists. Can freedom survive in systems we cannot see? Belief is the invisible engine of American life. Long before laws are written, ideas decide what is possible. America was founded not only on territory, but on ideology. The belief in individualism shaped the nation's moral framework. Self-reliance became a virtue tied to dignity and worth. This idea was reinforced by frontier mythology. The westward expansion framed survival as proof of merit. Yet this belief ignored the displacement of Native Americans. Manifest Destiny presented conquest as moral destiny. Belief justified violence as progress. Religion has always played a central role in American belief. Early settlers viewed the New World as a divine mission. John Winthrop described America as a city upon a hill. This moral exceptionalism persists in political rhetoric. Presidents often frame policies as battles between good and evil. Belief simplifies complexity. During the Cold War, belief became a weapon. Capitalism and communism were framed as moral opposites. The United States defined itself as a defender of freedom worldwide. This belief justified foreign interventions. Vietnam was fought not only with weapons, but with ideology. The domino theory suggested that one fallen nation threatened global liberty. Millions died under a belief that could not tolerate nuance. At home, belief shaped identity and division. The civil rights movement challenged deeply held assumptions. Segregation was defended as tradition rather than oppression. Belief protected injustice by normalizing it. Martin Luther King Jr. reframed belief through moral clarity. He appealed to the Constitution as a promissory note. Freedom was redefined as a shared moral obligation. Belief shifted, but not without resistance. In recent decades, belief has fragmented. Media ecosystems create parallel realities. Facts are filtered through ideology. Truth becomes secondary to identity. The rise of partisan news hardened divisions. People began believing not in evidence, but in belonging. Social media intensified this shift. Algorithms reward outrage over reflection. Belief becomes performative rather than thoughtful. Philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche warned that people cling to beliefs to avoid uncertainty. Certainty provides comfort in a complex world. America's political culture reflects this fear of ambiguity. Debates over climate change reveal belief overriding science. Economic identity often determines acceptance of evidence. Belief becomes tribal. Conspiracy theories thrive where trust collapses. The erosion of shared belief weakens democratic dialogue. Without common assumptions, compromise feels like betrayal. Belief hardens into ideology. Ideology resists self-examination. This creates moral absolutism. Each side claims ownership of freedom. Each side views power as illegitimate when used by the other. The price of belief becomes division. Yet belief also fuels hope. Every reform movement begins with an imagined alternative. Belief can entrench injustice or inspire change. The American question asks, which beliefs we choose to protect? Power always demands a price. In America, that price is often paid in trust. Democracy depends on faith in institutions. When trust erodes, legitimacy collapses. The 20th century exposed the human cost of unchecked authority. The Vietnam War revealed how power can operate through deception. The Gulf of Tonkin incident was used to justify military escalation. Later investigations showed the threat had been exaggerated. Public trust in government suffered lasting damage. The Pentagon Papers confirmed systematic dishonesty. Citizens learned the leaders could lie in the name of national interest. Trust never fully recovered. The Watergate scandal deepened this crisis. A sitting president was forced to resign for abusing power. Richard Nixon's downfall proved that no leader was above the law. Yet it also reinforced public cynicism. People began to assume corruption was normal. Power became synonymous with self-interest. Economic power followed a similar path. The 2008 financial crisis exposed systemic failure. Banks engaged in reckless speculation with little accountability. When the system collapsed, taxpayers funded bailouts. Millions lost homes and savings. Few executives faced consequences. The message was clear. Power protects itself. Trust in markets declined alongside trust in government. Philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau argued that authority is legitimate only through consent. When people feel exploited, consent erodes. This erosion fuels populism. Both left and right movements claim to speak for the forgotten. Anger replaces deliberation. Power becomes the enemy rather than the tool. Policing offers another example of trust under strain. High-profile cases of police violence sparked nationwide protests. The killing of George Floyd in 2020 became a turning point. Video evidence contradicted official narratives. Communities questioned whether law enforcement served protection or control. The slogan, "No justice, no peace," reflected moral rupture. Power without accountability breeds resentment. The justice system itself came under scrutiny. Mass incarceration revealed racial disparities. Trust in fairness declined. Courts were seen as distant and unequal. The COVID-19 pandemic further tested institutional credibility. Public health guidance shifted as knowledge evolved. Many perceived inconsistency as manipulation. Misinformation filled the gap left by uncertainty. Trusts fractured along ideological lines. Expert authority was rejected as elite. Philosopher Max Weber warned that legitimacy requires rational trust. When explanations fail, obedience collapses. Power then relies on force or fear. America stands at this crossroads. Institutions still function, but belief in them weakens. Without trust, freedom becomes fragile. Power must justify itself anew. The American question deepens. Can authority be restored without sacrificing liberty? The American story has never been finished. It is revised by each generation. Freedom, power, and belief are not fixed truths. They are choices repeatedly made. History shows that freedom expands only when demanded. The abolition of slavery required moral courage and sacrifice. Women's suffrage was achieved through decades of protest and imprisonment. Civil rights were not granted voluntarily. They were forced into existence by collective action. Power rarely corrects itself without pressure. This reveals a difficult truth. Democracy is not it requires participation. Philosopher John Dewey argued that democracy is a way of life, not just a system. Citizens must see themselves as responsible for the whole. This responsibility begins with engagement. Voting remains the most visible expression of political power. Yet, voter apathy undermines representation. When participation declines, concentrated interests dominate. Freedom weakens through neglect. Education plays a critical role in sustaining belief. An informed public resists manipulation. However, education itself has become politicized. Debates over curriculum reflect deeper struggles over national identity. What should America remember? What should it forget? Belief shapes memory. Technology offers both risk and possibility. Digital platforms can amplify marginalized voices. They can also spread misinformation at scale. The challenge is not access, but discernment. Media literacy becomes a civic necessity. Without it, belief is easily hijacked. Power adapts faster than ethics. This creates moral lag. Artificial intelligence, surveillance, and automation raise new questions of control. Who benefits from efficiency? Who bears the cost? Freedom must be redefined for a technological age. Economic inequality remains a central obstacle. Freedom without material security is fragile. Philosopher Amartya Sen argued that freedom includes the capability to choose a life one values. Poverty restricts choice as effectively as coercion. Addressing inequality is not charity. It is a democratic belief in a shared future must be rebuilt. This requires humility. No single ideology owns truth. Democracy depends on disagreement. Without listening becomes an act of resistance. Compromise becomes a form of courage. The American question does not ask for certainty. It asks for commitment. Commitment to freedom that includes everyone. Commitment to power that is accountable. Commitment to belief that can be questioned. The price of belief is responsibility. The future of America depends on whether that price is paid.